Hey everybody, just want to give a quick update. I've been making any videos for a little bit. The reason being is, we had vacation, got some family sick. I've been riding my mountain bike a lot, working on the boat, doing some other things. So I haven't been doing too much with the Land Cruiser lately. It's been having some cooling issues. It hasn't got hot on me yet, but sometimes like sitting still in traffic, sitting in drive-through or something like that, it's getting a little warm. So I believe I need to get a better fan for it, and I just got one. I'll do a video on that soon probably. I got some other cooling stuff that I want to put in a video as well. But yeah, just dealing with the sickness. Let's see, got a video I've been putting together on suspension upgrade. The problem with that is everything seems to be back ordered, so still waiting on shocks, and I think I'm getting to the point now where I'm just going to upload what I got. Not edited too well, but just throw it up there, see if it helps somebody. But it's just taking too long to get everything, and the video is a mess because I'm doing things one week and then another week something else shows up, and it's hard to keep everything together chronologically when you've got to put coils in the front, and then you put shocks on the back, and then you get the rear coils, and then you get sway bar extensions and all that stuff and all that. But anyway, the reason I decided to do this video is because there was some questions pertaining to a Hydroboost setup, and I did the diesel swap, which kind of forced me to go to the Hydroboost setup, but I think it'll work with the Toyota pump and everything like that. So I'll put together some video. Watching my 3-year-old right now because my wife and daughter have been sick, so just going to try to get everything together as quickly as possible. See if I can find some images to assist, but I'll cover what I can. All right, today we're on the topic of Hydroboost. Had some questions on the 80 series Facebook group about possible brake upgrades. I had done the Hydroboost on my 80 series Land Cruiser because of the diesel swap. And before we get into that, I just want to kind of cover the basic brake booster for anybody who's not familiar, and we'll go from there. So this is on my 1985 Toyota 4Runner. Sorry for the mess. It's been sitting for a little while. I've got to do some work on it body-wise before I feel comfortable taking it off-road again. So it's kind of been back-burnered until I get my 80 series where I want it, and then this will be my trail rig after I get that set up. So what we're looking at here is a vacuum-driven brake booster. This is what's referred to as your master cylinder. This is your fluid reservoir, and this right here is the booster that actually provides additional force whenever you hit your brake. And this is driven off vacuum created by typically your engine. Since this has been turbo diesel swapped, there is a vacuum pump that creates the vacuum for this, but this is what you're used to seeing. Now, what's the difference with Hydroboost? Hydroboost will not have this. Instead, it has a valve and cylinder set up for hydraulic inputs that come off of your power steering pump. So your power steering pump will actually run your boost for your brakes, not the brakes itself. I mean, you'll still have brake fluid going down to the calipers and your cylinders if you have drum brakes, but you'll be using pressure from your power steering system to assist you in pushing the brake in and driving the master cylinder. The advantage of that is you no longer need vacuum from your engine, which is great if you're using some type of turbocharged or supercharged application, or if you're running high RPMs and you're losing vacuum at those high RPMs and you need to brake during those those scenarios. So let's go look at the Hydroboost system in my Land Cruiser, and I'll kind of show you the differences there. We'll go get the Land Cruiser and move it into some better light, because I don't think we're going to be able to see everything we need to see down there in the shade. So here's the GM Hydroboost setup. You can see here that there's a accumulator down here that accumulates pressure from the hydraulic system. There's a piston in there that makes sure you have at least a small amount of pressure on reserve all the time. You don't see the big black diaphragm back here like you saw on the 4Runner. Instead, you've got this it's kind of collection set up from the hydraulic system. There's a line here that comes up and attaches, that's coming off the power steering pump. You got this line here that goes down to your steering box, and then this line here that comes over the top and connects back here is your return line back down to the power steering pump. Now, it's kind of a basic overview, but let's trace some of these lines and I'll kind of show you what all that looks like. Alright, this is the steering box up at the driver's front. There's two lines that go into it. This rear line here is your return line. You can tell it's a return line low pressure because it's got a normal hose clamp on it. This line right here is a high pressure line that comes off of, well, let's start off. Normally this would come off of your power steering pump. So this would go up to your accessory driven power steering pump, and it would get its hydraulic pressure directly off the pump. With the Hydroboost setup, this actually goes up to the booster on the brakes. So that's a difference there. So it's in series. It goes from the pump that's here up to the brake master and then down here. On the GM setup, this is an O-ring fitting. On the Land Cruiser, this is a flared fitting. So all I had to do to take this off of the steering pump instead of the the brake booster instead of the pump was cut the O-ring fitting off the end of this and flare it, and use the original connector off of this box. So that's all I had to do, besides doing some different bending to make this reach up there, because there's some differences in the distance and actual placement of the steering boxes between the 93 Chevy that I took this off of and where the steering box is on this Land Cruiser. Alright, so what do we do about the two returns back to the power steering pump? Well, as you can see, I'm running a GM power steering pump. That may not be an option for you. You're not going to be able to see it, but basically you have one high pressure output and then two low pressure return lines. So your booster will have a return line back to the pump, and your box down there will have a return back to the pump. So what can you do? Well, you can Y those together, or what I would say you would do if you're running a Toyota setup is run the two returns together into a cooler. And the reason I say that is because, look, you're not only relying on this fluid anymore to drive your steering. If you're off-road somewhere and your steering gets a little bit harder, oh well. You get an arm workout, you pull over for a little bit, let things cool down. That's great. But when you're relying on it for steering and brakes, and this is one of the cons of the Hydroboost, is you can lose both of those systems together. If you lose a belt, your fluid overheats, you lose a pump, something like that. Brakes will still work, steering will still work, but better hope you've been hitting the gym lately. So I would tee those two together, put you a cooler up here in the front somewhere, and then run a line from that cooler back to the return if you've only got one return on the pump that you're using. The other thing. The other thing is you've got metric fittings for, these are 10 millimeters on the Land Cruiser. I'm not even sure what these are, but you can, I bought these on Amazon. It's a Hydroboost conversion kit, and it gives you a 3/8 connection. So all I had to do is cut the 10 millimeter fittings off the end of the Land Cruiser lines, get this adapter kit, and then get a couple of 3/8 fittings, and just reflare them. And these being old lines, you know, trial and error. I cracked it a couple times, just cut back minimally, so that if you make a mistake, you've got room to fix it. But you know, when you're flaring these, spray some WD-40 on them, go slow, do a couple turns, back it off, spray a little bit more WD-40 on them, keep going, back it off, and just do it slowly and carefully, and make sure you're not cracking the lines. If you do it nice and easy and use some lubricant, you can reflare these lines no problem. But how does it actually fit? So, and I'll try to find some pictures of this. I don't have any pictures from where I did this, but where the booster actually goes through the firewall, the Toyota has this plate, and the master cylinder has these 4 bolts that go through, and then you have nuts on the back side. The GM setup is similar, but it passes through, and it's actually got a huge threaded, the housing is threaded, and it goes through with a key. There's a keyed point on it, and a huge nut that goes on the back side, and I should be able to show you that when I go underneath here, underneath the dash. But basically I took 1/8 plate, cut it out to the correct size, marked my holes. I pressed the studs out of the Chevy because they were bigger, and pressed them into this plate. And then I put a little notch on there, or a little tab to run on that keyhole, just to keep it from spinning. I don't think you necessarily need that keyhole. There's a huge lock ring that goes on there. I'm pretty sure it's not going to move. You could probably do a screw or something to keep it from moving if you were scared of that, but I did use the tab, and it's worked fine so far. It's nice and tight. It's not going to move. So I'll get underneath and show you that. On the rod that goes through, what I did was, Toyota has a little clip that goes around your brake, the actual lever that your brake pad's attached to. I took that off. It's threaded on. I took that off, and then I just slid it over. There's an eyelet on the end of the GM one, so it's part of the rod. So I cut the little eyelet off. I slid the Toyota little U-bolt clip thing over the top of it. Once I got my spacing figured out, I just tacked it in place and painted it so it wouldn't rust under there. So I'll show you that. But it's pretty easy, but you do need a little bit of fabrication, or you might have to, use a die to thread that rod and run the Toyota clip on there. So I'll show you that. So this is what it looks like on the back side. You're not going to be able to see the nut and everything because it's actually inside the bore there, but I'll try to find a picture of that to add to the video. So this is the stock shaft that came with the GM Hydroboost. I just cut it short and then welded on the Toyota piece once I got my spacing right on the end. So that's how that interfaces. And for the studs that I use back here, those are the stock GM studs that I pressed in. You could reuse the Toyota bolt size, but I wanted to go a little bit larger, so I drilled out the holes just slightly to accommodate these larger studs. For pedal travel, I mean, I'm pushing it with my hand here, but that's pretty much it. I'm sliding myself back in the gravel right now. It does not have to travel far to really apply some stopping power. And I think a lot of that is you're going from the large bores, the large lines that came out of the master cylinder previously into those little Toyota lines. You're moving a lot more fluid with this system, so you're really putting a lot of pressure on there. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but and I don't know the exact specs, but I think with the vacuum system, you've got something like 900-ish pounds of pressure you can apply on the brakes, and I think it's over 3,000 with this Hydroboost system. So if you got any leaks, you're going to find them quick once you set this system up, because yeah, like I said, I'm using the original line still, but I was really worried that I'd blow something up with these. But this is common in like muscle cars when they do engine swaps or run some type of forced induction. So, you know, I crossed my fingers and hoped the Toyota stuff would hold up, and it's done great so far. I love these brakes. So here's the output. This is a 3FE. So, you know, depending on what you have, it may vary, but, you know, most likely you're going to deal with the same thing. But this is just a flared fitting. Don't know what size it is, haven't looked it up yet, but what this is telling me is most likely you can use the GM hose, or same size. You might have to make your own because, you know, the placement of the power steering pump and everything, but you should just be able to cut and flare the appropriate fitting, which is probably that same 17 millimeter flared fitting that's on the power steering box. And then here's your return. So ideally, you would pull the entire setup with all the hoses and everything out of the GM that you're using as a donor. Then you're going to adapt the input hose on the power steering, or on the brake booster, to here by flaring it. It will, from the booster, it will run down to your box. You're going to have two return lines. You're going to run to a cooler, and then you're going to run from that cooler back up here. Pretty easy. It's probably something you can knock out in a day if you've got the tools to fabricate your plate and flare the hoses. And like I said, you might have to make the high pressure hose that goes up there because of steering placement being different between the GM applications and the Toyota applications. So you may have to have someone make a hose for you that goes from this to the GM O-ring fitting that's on the other end. I'm going to see if I can find some pictures and maybe put a diagram together of what this looks like in a schematic form. So you're going to get to see my Microsoft Paint skills here in a second. The best picture I could find of the inside of the firewall portion of the booster was on Busted Knuckle Offroad. Hopefully they won't mind the advertisement here. I would recommend trying to find these locally at a scrapyard or carpart.com. See if you can get all the hoses and everything like that. You may not have everything that you need for your setup, but it'll at least give you an idea of what fittings go where and things like that. Like I said, it's kind of a mix between getting the O-ring fittings for the GM side and getting the flared fittings for the Toyota side. So I just wanted to go over this real quick. What you see here on the right of the picture kind of goes over what's happening inside of the firewall on the back side of that plate. You'll see that there's a threaded portion on the inside body of the booster itself that is nutted on. That nut has teeth on it that make it easy to turn on. but difficult to loosen. You'll kind of get an idea of what the plate looks like. Very easy to fabricate. If you have just a saw and a drill, you can make one of these. It's no big deal. A large hole saw in the middle, you'll have to see what size hole saw fits around those threads. There is a snap ring that goes around to keep your nut from loosening up too much. I did put some Loctite on mine just as an extra precaution. And you'll see here where I've marked the keyway, and that keyway lines up with a tab that needs to be in that hole. But like I said, I don't think it'll turn on you. It really doesn't have a lot of reason to turn. And if you do have issues with it turning, you can always try to do some type of screw or something like that that would hold it in place. And I would just make something that stuck out far enough to catch the body, maybe on that top side where it's not completely round, and that screw would prevent it from turning, or do some type of tab that sticks off if you have the ability to screw a tab in there. I used a welder, and I welded the tab center from the GM portion in there, but use your best judgment. You can do what you're capable of doing with your tools. On another note, you'll notice the shaft that protrudes here that would connect to the brake lever itself. On the GM, this is all one solid piece. What I did was I cut it off where the eyelet is on the shaft and welded the Toyota portion on there once I got the spacing right. If you wanted something that was fully adjustable, what I would likely do is get some rod in the same size, weld the Toyota portion on it, and then thread it so that with a die so that I could put a turnbuckle in there. And I think that would be a way to have an adjustable portion, but you'll have to do some type of fabrication for that, or I honestly don't know if you can change this shaft out. I looked at mine and tried to pull it out. It looked like it was just kind of clipped in there or pressed in there with some divots to hold it in, but I wasn't able to get it out. I didn't want to break anything, and it seemed pretty easy to me to just weld it the way I did. Here is a crude drawing of the path that the fluid takes in the GM Hydroboost setup. I've put all the high pressure lines in red here, and the low pressure or return lines are in blue, and I've noted the flow direction with these arrows. So you'll see that the power steering pump puts out high pressure, and that goes directly to the booster at the master cylinder. From there it splits off, and there's a return line that returns directly to the pump, and then there's another high pressure line that goes to the steering box. From the steering box it would go through a cooler that's mounted up in front of the radiator and back to the power steering pump. So you'll see here again that the power steering pump on the stock GM setup has 2 returns and 1 high pressure output. So we talked about how to physically mount the booster and master cylinder from a GM Hydroboost setup onto the firewall, and we talked about adapting the brake lines to fit into that master cylinder, and we talked about a couple of the fittings that you would have to change in order to tie the GM system into the Toyota system. But if we look at the actual path the fluid takes itself, the main difference between the GM and the Toyota is that the Toyota power steering pump, which this assumes you're still using, only has a single return line. Option 1 to make this look more like a GM is we could possibly drill and tap, or drill and solder a fitting into the power steering pump to give us that additional return line that we could plumb directly back into the reservoir. Or, and this is at your own risk, this is just coming straight from my head without seeing how other people have done this, just purely looking at the schematic and how things would work, there is another option. Option 2 would look like this. Basically what you would be doing is you would be taking the return line directly from the master cylinder and teeing it with the return line from the steering box, and then running it through your cooler and back to the Toyota power steering pump reservoir. Now this might create some flow restrictions or cause a pressure overrun into
steering box or master cylinder. I don't think that would be the case though, because remember that when you're returning these on the GM, they're basically just flowing into the reservoir. There's no real pressure or anything like that behind them. So as long as you're able to do this and not have any major back pressure buildup at the single return line on the power steering pump, I would think you would be okay with this. Again, I haven't tried it myself, but I know a lot of people run the Hydroboost setup on a lot of other vehicles, and I don't know how they do it, but this is probably how I would do it if I had to run it all into a single return. There you have it. That was an overview of the Hydroboost setup on my 80 series Land Cruiser. Again, I had the 3FE in there, but I swapped it over to a GM engine with the GM power steering pump, which made this swap a little bit easier, but you wouldn't have to change much to use the Toyota power steering pump, in my opinion. Again, do your own research on that. It looks pretty straightforward to me. If you have any questions or anything like that, don't hesitate to ask. You can ask me on the forum itself or here on YouTube, and I'll respond as soon as I can, and I can add additional detail to this if need be. Appreciate you watching the video, and hope you're able to do the swap on your own. Again, it's a great upgrade to the braking system, gives you more pressure, gives you more volume overall, and I think it really made a huge difference in my braking. I'm running 35s. I put the power stop pads and rotors on the front, and I am running the discs in the rear from the later series or later models of 80 series, and it's a great setup. Yeah, that's it. So out here, again, appreciate you watching.